Hello, and welcome back to another week of the Infinity Stone podcast. As always, I am Matt, and with me is Andy. And this week, we're talking about Avengers Age of Ultron. The movie's so nice, we've recorded this podcast twice.
Yeah, apparently Ultron did not like our attempts to discuss this, and it just munched. It just an 80-minute conversation or so that we had, maybe even longer, turned out to be 38 minutes, which in some ways, like, wow, efficient, except that it was just dropping like 20, 30, 70 seconds at a time, just bip, 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 bip. I'd make a Max Headroom reference, but I don't even know if you're young enough to get that one.
I actually understand that.
Yeah, you understood that reference. Good.
Yeah, I got that reference.
Yeah. But so this is the second time in a few days that we talked about this movie. So if it feels a little less natural for us, because I know what Matt at least said the last time, whether he'll say it again next time or not. You know, we know what our scenes are. We know the rankings that we gave, although I actually did consider changing mine, but I don't think I did. So that'll explain why. And frankly, if we have a little less enthusiasm, because I got to say, Matt, that was probably our best show ever.
Oh, it was amazing. You know, there's no way we can recapture that magic. This is only a tribute to that.
Yeah, it was quite possibly a perfect podcast, and YouTube just didn't want us to have it.
No. But here's the thing. I know we have a lot to talk about, so let's get right to it.
We're the Avengers. We can bust arms dealers all the live long day, but that up there, that's the end game. How are you guys planning on beating that?
Together.
We'll lose.
And we'll do that together too.
But before we talk about Age of Ultron, of course, this is the second Avengers movie. It brought back all of the Avengers from the first movie, along with introducing some brand new ones. There was the Vision, and of course, we had a superpowered speedster who has a superpowered sister who uses her mind to create, a force field amongst other powers. So, of course, that makes us want to bring in our own speedster. Christopher?
What? You didn't see that coming?
What? That's not Quicksilver. Now, this won't surprise many of you, or hopefully any of you, that they didn't make Quicksilver costumes for children. And even if they had, I don't know if mine would have wanted them. But, Dash Incredible. We got to have that, right, buddy? All right. Did you want to show people how a speedster fights?
Yeah.
All right. I will be your guinea pig once again. All right. And I'll throw. Oh! Super speed. Oh, that was not planned. I did not see that coming. All right, mister. Was this as much fun doing this the second time as it was the first time?
Yeah.
Do you think Matt was even more surprised this time than last time? I don't see how that would be possible.
Yeah.
All right. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about? Is there anything you wanted to ask Matt?
What do you got for me? Anything? Nothing? That's okay.
Well, we didn't find the mask.
Yeah, I know you're not protecting your secret identity, but you know what? It's
okay.
Right there on the screen, so we already blew that cover.
What?
For you.
Where?
Well, you know how to read that word. What's that say?
I don't know.
Christopher. Don't worry. He hasn't even gone to kindergarten yet. He's working on it. All right, buddy. Good night.
Good night.
Cap, you got incoming.
Incoming already came in. Stark, you worry about bringing the city back down safely.
The rest of us have one job. Tear these things apart. You get hurt them back. You get killed, walk it off.
And we're back, and we're here to talk about Age of Ultron. Usually this is where I ask you for your general reaction, but instead of doing that, I want to ask you about a common criticism of this movie, which is that it is both understuffed and, I meant to say overstuffed and underdeveloped. Andy, what do you think of that?
I think that's a fair criticism of the movie. I totally understand what people are saying about it. I felt probably similarly, but maybe less bothered by it my first time watching, in part because, yeah, it was overwhelming, but I didn't necessarily mind being overwhelmed because I'm here, like, overwhelm me, bring it on. However, I have found that rewatching it lessens a lot of those problems for me as a viewer. Now, that doesn't let the movie off the hook. It shouldn't leave its first viewing audience or second people feeling like, oh, what are they doing? They don't know what they're doing, or there's too much here. But when you watch it again, and I've watched it many times now, you find actually that all of the pieces do fit together. They just happen to fit together like a puzzle where you might have mashed them a bit, or maybe some of the corners are rolling up, but they're still in together. Or maybe even a better analogy is like all of the things are threaded and connected, but things are bursting out at the seams in between. Well, how about yourself?
I mean, I also think it's a more than fair criticism. I think that I haven't seen it as many times as you have, and the thing about this movie is the things I like in this movie, I generally really, really like. But the things I don't like, I forget about so quickly that every time they come up again, I'm like, what? What's going on here? And you're right, the movie does fit together, but I would say that you have to make some leaps of logic to kind of get there, and they're not terribly big leaps, and they are made, but it's the type of thing where you might have to watch a couple times to make them. And I think the difference between, say, this and the first Avengers is the first Avengers movie didn't have to introduce anyone. It didn't have to introduce any new villains or any new heroes. I think the only character we had never met before that was in the first Avengers was Maria Hill. That's it. Otherwise, the only character with like any real lines and screen presence, but she was a small part. Everyone in that movie, including the villain, were people we'd seen before. Whereas in this movie, we not only have to introduce a villain, we have to create the villain, introduce him. We also have to introduce 3 new heroes, and then there's small bit parts as well that they introduce to kind of round out what's happening, to fill in some of the blanks. This movie has to do a lot of work.
Yeah, and then along with that, it's also trying to do the work of future movies, right? It's trying to further along the idea of Infinity Stones, which obviously they've been dancing towards. The end of Avengers shows Thanos, and many people thought that would be next. And they made the wise decision that, like, it's not time yet, we're not ready. But in doing so, they had to kind of introduce this whole middle thing, while also using that as a launching board of the next thing. And I say it does all fit together. More you watch it, you kind of see like, oh, okay, this has to be there for that, but it's not elegant, it's and what it is
the flop sweat is showing.
Yeah, and typically how they get it to fit together is through dialogue. They have somebody saying something, probably not even naturally, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, now I know, And frankly, some of it is just really awkward. It's like, oh, this is the cave of blah, blah, blah. Right. So like all the pieces fit awkwardly, but, they fit. It's like a Jenga tower that, all of the, it's still up there, it's still there, but it's wavering, and it's not the the soundest way of necessarily constructing something. But as I say, now I'm like, I don't know, I'm probably over a dozen viewings of this movie in, and it's hard. I can't pretend that I'm still bothered by those things. So I do want to fully recognize and acknowledge that though that is a problem. It's not something you should necessarily aim for as a movie. You can't count on many viewers watching it as often as I have. And the reason why I have watched it as much is the highs are really high, to the point where what I wish that could happen, and especially when I was watching it this time, is just a thought I had, is like, if this would be like the greatest 8-episode HBO show of all time. Now, obviously, it couldn't be done because it's super expensive, and trying to do superheroes on a lower budget generally leads to choices that weaken them. And obviously, you can enjoy them. I've enjoyed some of the superhero TV shows, but they're not this, right? But just like there's so much in this movie that it feels like a mini series. There's parts that feel like you could have stayed with them and developed them a bit longer. Imagine if Ultron isn't like created until the second or third episode of this. Imagine if the creation of the Vision is like its own episode. So that's what it kind of feels like, because I love so much of it that it's hard for me to say what I'd take out.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the thing. I think my general reaction to the movie is that the good in this movie outweighs the negative for me. The stuff that I like so much that I'm more willing to overlook the stuff I don't like, because the stuff I like in this movie I think is really, really good. And the stuff I don't like, I don't think is bad. I just think it just doesn't work. A lot of it, like, it needed a bit more time. Like, the stuff that's bad in this movie wouldn't even necessarily be bad if more time could be had. Now, I agree. A theatrical movie. No more time could not be had. Like, they stretched about as far as a theatrical movie could go, and I'm certainly not advocating that it should have been longer. I'm not advocating that there's some kind of great director's cut out there that makes it feel better. Like, Joss Whedon, to his credit, has said, no, this is the director's cut. Editing is something that happens to movies. Packing things on wouldn't have necessarily made it better, but it's just like the worst parts of this, or even just the overall feeling that a lot of people get when they watch it, including, again, myself, the first time I watched it to a lesser degree of, whoa, like, did they even know what they're doing? Would have been alleviated if, there was more, because the stuff that's here, and why I've watched it so many times, and sometimes it's, I watch a bit of it and then I leave and I watch more of it, which, given everything I've said, is actually kind of speaks to the ideal way of viewing it. It's like, I don't want less of these battles. Like, they're all so great. So many great set pieces. Yeah. I mean, and so here, let me ask you this, Andy. Does this movie suffer from sequelitis? Because in my opinion, this movie has the common flaws that you'd see in like the middle book of a trilogy, or, well, I know you don't read, so maybe, like the middle movie of a trilogy. But no, it's like you usually have like a first movie which tells a complete story, and then since it's successful, you write 2 sequels, right? And you turn it into a trilogy. And in the second one, you're expanding the world out, you're introducing new villains, you're introducing new threats, and everything gets bigger, and you have to introduce new characters. And usually second books or movies of a trilogy burst at the seams in the same way this did. So does this suffer from sequelitis?
Well, absolutely, because everything like that was great about the first movie, or most of the things anyway, they do again, but more, right? And that's what sequels do, right? We spent a good portion of the Avengers podcast speaking about the Battle of New York, which was like, a half-hour final huge superhero battle. This one does more. It's a longer battle, more heroes, more fighting. That one had, and the heroes meet and then fight. We have some of that. You would have like smaller little fights in the middle. This one has about 3 fights in the middle.
Yep.
This starts with a big introductory fight, which is, on the level of everything but the Battle of New York for Avengers. So yeah, it's like, okay, we know what to do, and we've set the bar. We need to put higher, which is what most sequels do. And just found like they might have found their limits with this film. I say might, that like this is as most you could do, except that we do know that they clear the bar with a third one.
Yeah. Maybe the problem is that they hadn't introduced the villain before. With Infinity War, they had already introduced Thanos. And while they still spent a lot of time on him, there was less they had to establish with him. Maybe the problem here, which they didn't have a problem with in the first or third Avengers, was that they had to create and introduce Ultron all here. Maybe it would have been best had they found a way to introduce that villain before, but that also would have made no sense for Tony's motivations.
Yeah, I mean, unless they could have done something that like Iron Man 3 isn't completely abandoned by this next movie. Like that could have been a start.
Yeah,
that
maybe.
Like if instead of blowing up all of his suits that suddenly he rebuilds for this movie, he's actually building a robot to replace himself. That could have been a way. And I think that's probably one of the lessons they learn, is that the big crossover Avengers movie, of which again the next one will have to be even bigger, because they introduce a whole new other team and that sort of thing, is it's not time to introduce stuff, it's time to end stuff. Now obviously Infinity War also has one other benefit, is that it's still only half a story. We still have the other half to go, so I do believe they learned a lot of lessons. But the entire threat of Ultron, and also like the the reason for his existence and idea in the first place happens all in this movie. Even if it had been a continuation of like, and it just started this movie, but like you and me, Bruce, have been working on this Ultron idea for a long time, and they kind of do that with the dialogue, which it's like this is what we've been talking about. And apparently they had the name Ultron, which I'm guessing is what the Iron Legion program was. Again, this is kind of what we're talking about. It's there, but it's not.
Yeah. There, but not is a good way to describe the connective tissue of this movie.
Yeah. It's just like, but yeah, all of a sudden this murder bot exists and they have to rush through his, motivations and all of that. But in the end, I mean, we get a super awesome murder bot that forces them to fight in cool ways. What do you think about the set pieces this film?
I really like the set pieces. So, I don't think any of them live up to the Battle in New York. I don't know if there is a set piece in the Marvel universe that lives up to the Battle in New York, but I think they might be better than the second best set piece of Avengers. I think that every single one of these fights is excellent. I don't think there's a dud among them. I think the big ones are really good. I think the small ones are really good. With like maybe the exception of like when Vision's created, like that might be my least favorite.
That's just kind of a
but that's hardly anything. But like but all the fights they have in this movie are great fights, and I think that's really where Whedon shines because he's so creative. I think he's much more creative than most of the people that they have, and just the way he stages and constructs these set pieces. We talked about in the battle how he makes time to stage and construct that like big comic book splash page shot, and he does it here too, twice. He has the running forward poster shot, which is a really cool different shot, and then he has the big circle one at the end battle. So he both pays attention to kind of the big scope of them and also the moments of awesome.
Yeah, and I think in those, and it should be noted that Joss Whedon himself has said that he leans heavily on his, action coordinators and his, co-directors or, second unit or whatever, the terms. But yeah, it's a difference than the other movies. And I think maybe a big key is the fact that he is versed in comic books. He has been a fan his whole life. And then at this point he had written some. And yeah, because you see it. You see how they can kind of translate the big 2-page spread, a splash page in a comic book where you can have so many different little things going on because the reader has time to take it all in. The eye can move across the page and even just linger. That's the beauty of the medium that's different than a moving picture medium, and frankly, obviously different than words, and probably something that people who are more just reading books struggle with comics is like, the art matters actually a lot. That's a big part of the story. But you see the way he actually tries to do that and try to find a way for film to do it in the big scene in Sokovia when they're protecting the drill, because his camera is doing the job of our eye for a splash page, which is moving around, and the images slow down, right? You see kind of it almost pauses for a second, and then Captain America smashes by, and Scarlet Witch is moving her hands, and Quicksilver speeds by, smashes something, slows down, and it just gives us enough that in comic books would be a static image of everything happening at once. It recreates that, then also kind of shows that motion and stuff, that these things actually aren't happening at once. In a comic book, they have to show it in one panel if that's the way they chose to do it. Here, you see it a lot. And yes, it's very exciting. And I think the fact that you have a lot of robots works because everybody gets to smashy and punchy and stuff. It is fun.
Right, exactly. You get to kill lots of stuff and not feel bad about it because they're not people. And they're not CGI aliens. CGI robots look better than CGI aliens. I think there's another big difference about the climactic fight to Ultron and Avengers from those that we're going to see coming up in, Infinity War and to a certain extent Civil War too. In Avengers and in Ultron, the focus of the fights is as much about saving civilians as it is about defeating the bad guy. Whereas in Infinity War and Civil War, the climactic fights are these big battles where there's no one around. There's no civilians. Everyone involved, everyone near that battle is a combatant. And I think that really adds something when you have a focus on heroes saving people, because again, to me, that's like the definition of a hero. It's less about defeating the villain, more about saving people, because you're defeating a villain to save people. So again, like that's actually something that we'll probably be talking about next week next week with Civil War, because I noted a line in that movie as I've already watched it that made reference to that. So
yeah, and it was very self-conscious in this part because this movie follows Man of Steel, DC's entry into the idea of universe building, which at the time they actually did not know that's what they were doing. And in that movie, they take the world's most heroic, superpowered figure and have him mindlessly destroy a city with absolute no care to the people around. In fact, leave at one point. And obviously he had his reasons. There was a thing going to destroy the whole planet, but one of the major criticisms people took out of that movie is, wow, thousands of people, like 9/11s are happening all over the screen, and clearly the movie doesn't care to the degree that, at the end, Superman's making out on the mass grave that is Metropolis.
I mean, right.
This movie is their answer to that is that they, we'll save everyone, every last person. There's a dog, whatever. Everyone must be saved.
I was so happy that dog got on the plane, man. I mean, look, I got a dog last week. That dog getting on the plane was like it hit me right in the feels. I needed that dog to get on.
So yes, it was a response to that, but it's like, that's what superheroes do. That's what heroism is. What's the point of winning the day if you don't save people? And this was in their DNA. It's the beginning, and it's very much here now.
Yeah, and a lot of this movie is devoted to that question, because it's not just this big final scene that's about saving people. We also see the consequences of when they can't focus on that with the Hulkbuster scene. The whole fight between Hulk and the Hulkbuster, which is a good fight in my opinion. I think that's an interesting fight, an interesting way to kind of show Hulk's power and oppose him in a different way than just another Hulk. That's one that shows the consequences of letting heroes run amok in a way. And I think that scene does a better job of setting up Civil War, in a lot of ways than this does. And Civil War, I think, is actually very kind to this movie. And I say that as someone who really likes Civil War, because it finishes off some of the stories that were less well drawn in and were only set up in this movie.
Yeah, which shows the advantages and strengths of having this shared universe continuing franchise of small pictures, which, again, I think the later big one will realize is you do this in the other ones. You have all of these other movies, and you can trust that the majority of your audience is going to be seeing them, which maybe at this point in time, they weren't sure, right? The Avengers movies had such bigger numbers than, say, a Thor movie did, especially that last one. Whereas, from here on out, I think they kind of realized, sure, not everybody is going to see Ant-Man and Doctor Strange, but our box office is showing that enough people are that we don't need to spend a lot of time in Infinity War introducing these people, because that's not only does this movie introduce new people, it has to reintroduce its own characters, and it spends a lot of time with that. But just getting back to saving people, it's just, it was a good point. I think there's probably only one other scene in the rest of the MCU where there's a battle amongst people. I guess two, there's a battle amongst people, one where they care about it.
Well, in Civil War, they actually,
the first one.
Well, in Captain America Civil War, there actually are some battles amongst people, but not the big one. Like the battle, there are a few where they're running through crowds and through cities, and they are worried about the civilians there, to its credit. But then the big one is just empty airport. Yeah,
which it has to be, right?
Right.
And that kind of ties in this thought is that you can't have heroes fighting heroes and not care that there's a bunch of damage happening to everybody else. And that movie, they announced, they're like, the airport is closed, it's clear. And it's because if a bunch of people were put in danger, these heroes would stop fighting each other, because heroes should protect people. They don't just kill people with their laser blast eyes. But and what other thing that it does is not just show heroism and frankly put the thumb in the eye to your terrible competitor, is that it helps explain why they need the other guys. That's always a big question about big superhero teams, especially the teams that are a collection of heroes, as opposed to, say, a unit that's brought together for a specific reason, like a Fantastic Four or an X-Men. Is that why does the Justice League need the other 6 people? They already have Superman, who can do almost anything. And then, frankly, maybe he can't be everywhere at once. So they have Wonder Woman, who has most of his powers already, or Martian Manhunter, who has most of his powers plus more. Why do they need everybody? Well, again, so this one, why do they need anybody else if they have the God of Thunder and the Infinity Stone powered android? And the answer is, you need the guy with the bow and arrow, and the woman with the guns, and the guy with the shield to protect the bystanders.
Right. To be fair, I think Vision is a synthezoid, not an android, but quibbles. So anything else to say about are there any set pieces that we haven't covered?
Actually, you touched upon it real quick, and I just wanted to kind of get into it a bit more. What do you think of the Hulk and the Hulkbuster scene? Because it's, once again, just two CGI creations mashing on one another, which is a thing that people have complained about. And obviously, we did not enjoy it for like the first Hulk movie, nor the first Iron Man. And so it's one of those easy complaints, especially people who like, third act or whatever, which this is not. It's like, I don't really get into it when, the CGI thing is fighting the CGI thing. I kind of feel like that wasn't a problem this time.
No, I like that scene. I think it works pretty well, and I think it works because there's enough of a contrast there between the Hulkbuster and Hulk. Like he's tearing off the arm has to rebuild itself. You have the like jackhammer arm, part, or the, I don't even know how to describe that. When he just punches real fast. Yeah. But and you have the constant flashes to Tony's face, of him reacting to it and trying to talk him through that. And I think that works pretty well.
Yeah, I think it's a great contrast of styles is what helps it work, is that, the Hulk is just pure strength and rage, whereas, Tony is trying to solve the problem and solve the problems throughout, both the problem of battling the Hulk and also the problem of trying to keep the Hulk from destroying the people around him. And you get to see that. And you have a person. We get his face. We also get his voice throughout. So I think, just those things are probably what would help, otherwise, two CGI creations bashing together. Although I will say, and we'll talk about this more next week, the problem isn't always that CGI versus CGI. It's just if you don't have anything else, if the characters aren't drawn in or whatever, CGI can be wonderful. These movies wouldn't be possible without it.
I agree. So with that, let's go to break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about our favorite sequences of the movie.
Are you up for this? Are you? Look, I just need to know, because the city is flying. Okay, look, the city is flying. We're fighting an army of robots. And I have a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense. But I'm going back out there because it's my job. Okay, and I can't do my job and babysit.
Doesn't matter what you did, what you were.
If you go out there, you fight, and you fight to kill. Staying here, you're good. I'll send your brother to come find you, but if you step out that door, you are an Avenger.
Back again, and now we're talking about our favorite sequences from this movie. Andy, hit me. What do you got?
Just like last week, I have the Battle of Sokovia, which almost feels like a cheat because it's so long. And I think for some people, it's so long. For me, it's just like, I could live in this forever. This is, and what it is that it feels like the final issue of a big crossover series, of which most of them suck now. But it's just like, they set up all the stakes, and now, everybody's come together to have this big battle, and it feels like it. And you get lots of great little moments within, whether it's, Captain America, saving the person on the bridge, or Thor and Ultron having the fight. But within there, I think probably my favorite moments within the moments are the two big speeches. Obviously, just Captain America is the one to start it, but even within there, it's just a quick one where it's a quick little pep talk. It's like, if you get hurt, shake it off, or if you get killed, walk it off, or something. And or you get hurt back. If you get killed, walk it off. And then even more so is Hawkeye's a little moment where he finds the Scarlet Witch, and she's having a little trouble with everything going on because of the guilt she's dealing with. Her homeland, which she was trying to protect, is being destroyed as a result of at least in part with her helping Ultron. And we said actually in the first Avengers podcast, you were saying like, Hawkeye was at his best there, and I was like, no, I think there's another movie, and I think it's here. Not only do we obviously get the stuff with his family early on, but we get this moment where he's talking to her, and it's like, the city is flying, and I have a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense, and it's just, it shows the strength of this Hawkeye character, which is nothing like Hawkeyes in other mediums, but also the value he brings to the team. That, why is there just a silly guy in a bow and arrow? Because having somebody who's a little grounded to this action kind of helps you understand what's important about this, that these aren't just a bunch of gods doing their thing. It's a guy who knows that we need to fight, and now's the time to do so.
Yeah, no, and you were right. This is a much better movie for Hawkeye. I actually really like Hawkeye in this movie, something which, sometimes I go back and forth about in some of the other movies. But in this movie, he works really well. And that scene is a great scene. And I love that scene as well.
Yeah, and like it's a continuation of what's happening a lot in the movie with Hawkeye is that Joss Whedon is toying with people. He keeps getting the this is my last day before retirement. I got a kid just ready to born type idea that like Hawkeye's gonna die. Every battle's got to have a death because that's how we know they have stakes for one. And because I'm Joss Whedon, I'm going to kill somebody. And then of course it fakes out and it's not him.
Right. You see, I don't actually like the fake out, the fact that it's Quicksilver that died instead of Hawkeye. And it's not even that I think that Hawkeye needed to die. It's more the fact that, Whedon sets up the Hawkeye death. And he makes it very clear in the movie, especially if you rewatch it, that that's who he's setting up as the one to die. And the thing is, he's a little too savvy of his own perception here. He knows that people expect expect him to kill someone. And so he makes it clear, this is the guy I'm going to kill. This is the guy I'm going to kill. This is the guy I'm going to kill. Oh, it was someone else. So the Quicksilver death just doesn't land because he doesn't set it up. Usually the Whedon deaths land because he sets them up, or there's someone so well from living in that universe. Like if you watched Firefly and then the character who died in Serenity dies, that lands because that character from Firefly so well. And there's actually two characters that die. I know that, but the one I'm talking about.
Yes, the one that wasn't set up, and then you felt it. And no, Quicksilver's death does just feel like Whedon's wink. It's like I killed Coulson before. I gotta kill somebody, and a lot of his answers for why he's killed various characters in the past is that it gives a battle stakes. That's not for one. Again, pin in that. It's a conversation we keep teasing around. We're going to get to, but for two, the battle was over, man. It isn't even established that this battle is going to be for real. It because somebody died. And it's one last person to go. And again, the fake out with Hawkeye. It's he gets on, he takes a breath, and then he steps back out. Oh, now he's going to die. It's all just pretty much just playing with the fans. It's somebody has to be sacrificed to the dramatic gods, and that part I don't like either, and for reasons that we will get into. But how about yourself? What was your favorite part of the movie?
My favorite part of the movie is one of the few quiet moments that really lands, and that's the party. Like you, that's a big scene. There's a lot that happens there, a lot of really fun stuff, and there is a highlight of that. But before I get to the highlight specifically, I just want to kind of talk about why I love that moment, because it's a rare moment when you see all of these characters that have been in their own movie interacting, and there's not a crisis. There's not, there's not some world-ending destruction that they've been brought together to fight. They are just hanging out, and they're mingling with, Tony's weird friends and Cap's a 90-year-old World War II veterans. There's all these random people at this party, and it's a chance for these characters to unwind and see them unwound that we just don't get to see. But the highlight of the party is everyone trying to lift the hammer, which is a great, great scene. And I love how everyone plays it. We talked about Hawkeye earlier, as this is a great movie for him. Him playing slightly drunk as he reads the hammer text is one of my favorite parts of this movie. He lowers his voice and goes all intoning, it's he who is worthy, shall hold.
He who therefore have the power with the power. And my favorite moment within those moments is when Captain America goes to lift the hammer and it budges ever so slightly. And you see the look on Thor that happens, just uh-oh. And then it doesn't move, and he's like, no, everything's good. You can tell that his heart skipped a beat in that moment, and it's just fantastic because, of course, if anybody who could lift the hammer be worthy, it would be Steve Rogers. And then, as a comic book fan, it's a little nod that there was a time when Steve Rogers actually did pick up Mjolnir, thus thereby proving himself to Thor because it was a time when he had quit being Captain America. Yeah, no, I love that part too. And like just within the Hammer scene within it, like overall, the party itself does a great job of showing the camaraderie. It helps kind of fill in the gaps that, yes, these people have been off doing their own thing, but clearly they've been bonding on some level, as does the introductory scene of the film when they're fighting at the Hydra base, where, they're all bantering throughout. They have their combo moves, but they're also, teasing Steve because he, said language.
Said language.
Yeah. Which they do again in this party, right?
Yes.
I believe Maria Hill brings it up. But just within the Hammer thing, it's just perfect little reintroductions of each character. So, Hawkeye does what he does, but then, Tony Stark full of swagger, right? And a totally Tony Stark thing. It doesn't work. He brings out some tech. That doesn't work. He brings out his buddy Rhodey. That doesn't work. Obviously, we get the Steve fairly humble attempt at doing it that almost works. We get Bruce, trying to and everybody's kind of like, yeah, still not funny, buddy.
Too soon.
And then the nice kicker of Natasha being like, I don't need that question answered. It's just in miniature. It shows who these people are, even without the costume. So yeah.
And the best thing about the Hammer scene is that it sets up jokes later in the movie. It sets up the dramatic reveal / joke of Vision lifting the hand, just giving it to Thor, which is a great little moment. And I love everyone's faces when Vision does that. It's, it's just this great moment. And everyone's like, okay, I guess, I trust the android now.
Yeah,
and then it
because
also
of the hammer. And then obviously at the end, you get the nice bow on that, where everything seems to be slowed down, but then, Cap and Iron Man start talking again. It's like, well, if you put it in an elevator, it's still going to move up. Elevator's not worthy. And frankly, just within that, it kind of gets back to what I was talking about how the pieces of this movie actually do fit together. Because that shows it's like we're going to have this hammer scene, and then that will end up showing, and especially if the audience isn't versed in all of the hammer stuff, because our numbers tell us people aren't watching Thor movies to the same degree. Is that hammer equals worthiness? This machine, who seems like he could be the second Ultron, lifts it, so he must be worthy, and then of course at the end it's like that he's not worthy. None of us are worthy. There's a trick to that hammer. And and you say it's like one of the the few quiet scenes, and I agree that this is the best of the quiet scenes. It is one of my favorite scenes, not just of this movie, but it's one of my favorite scenes of the whole Marvel universe, in part because this movie is kind of the last time we get Avengers camaraderie. You get it a bit at the beginning of Civil War, but after that, they're either never together or they're fighting or mad at each other.
And it's still not the full crew because you don't have the Hulk and Thor there.
Yeah, but I also like the stuff on the farm. With
I do too.
Strong caveat, but I do like that. You can feel the weight of it. The battles they've had, but also just both the natural setting. Like I do think they do a really good job of establishing like this is what it's like when adults are talking at the end of the night at like the cabin, just like at the party. That felt like a party, you got separate conversations and things going within the cabin. Probably my favorite part is when Steve rips apart the log with his bare hands.
Yeah, I love that too. That's a great moment. And I also just love how comfortable like Natasha is at the cabin, where it's like, oh, like Hawkeye not only has an entire life away from everyone else, but it's one that she knows about too, and she hangs out there, and like she has a life away from everyone else. It's an interesting reveal, and I think it works really well because both those characters are so secretive.
Yeah, and just like when Furies come to visit, and then he's telling them everything that's going on. That scene feels very lived in. Tony Stark trying to throw darts, and then Hawkeye throws one from the next room and bullseyes it. Just quick little things like that and little sides that show. Again, one of Whedon's strengths is that he's a bit of a screenwriter. He finds these little moments, whether they're dialogue or not. Again, this movie, I think, in the scenes that we're talking about, the scenes that some of it shows his strengths and why I like to watch it now, because I do just kind of now view it as revisiting these scenes that I like. But it also shows his weaknesses and probably why his time was done. Well, and he spoke about it himself, is that he's was tired of it, that it took a lot out of him, but also just these have become too big for the level he's at. And I think the future directors, the Russos that we're going to get into next week, don't have his talent for dialogue, although their movies are also, pretty funny and fun. We've also suggested they don't necessarily have his talent for as creative as set pieces, but what they're really good is the engineering and the world building that these things require.
And I completely agree with that. But we've been talking about some of the flaws of this movie. Andy, what's your biggest flaw here?
Most people will say it, and they're right. It's Thor's bath vision, which I guess wasn't his vision, according
it's not his hallucination, it's a vision.
That's right. That segment won't have aired yet, but yeah,
spoiler.
We film out a sequence. He just goes into a random cave somewhere where they're Selvig because they wanted to bring in another character, and I guess he needed somebody to talk to. He needed somebody to explain to the audience what was going on, and then just and also they needed the Chris Hemsworth topless scene, very important. And then all of a sudden they do all this, and it only exists to further the franchise's goals. This one was forced upon Whedon by Marvel. It's like, we need all this to do, and I'm not somebody who necessarily gets rankled every time a director of one of these things is forced to do something by the producers. We will have that discussion in 3 days, but this one totally feels just shoved in there.
Yeah, no, that scene stinks. It's the worst scene there. I'm going to talk about a different scene because there are multiple scenes in this movie that I think are bad scenes, and multiple, things in this movie that I have problems with. For me, Vision's creation, which in some ways is a continuation of Thor's vision, but it's not really. But Vision's creation is just, suddenly you have Tony repeating the mistakes he made earlier this movie. You have someone calling him on it, and then they're like, nope, we're still going to do it. And then you have like this weird confrontation, and then suddenly Vision's born. And Thor shows up, lightning, Vision's born, and you're just like, what the hell just happened? Like, I almost would have preferred if it happened off screen, because that's what it feels like. It feels like, it's almost like something happens off screen, and just like, oh, hey, here's Vision. And it's pretty late in the movie.
It's like the final third. All of a sudden, they introduce not only a new character, but like the key to the entire victory. Yeah, he is the Deus Ex machine.
Yeah, pun intended there. And the thing is, I actually like Vision. I like Paul Bettany's performance. I like, some of the scenes he has in this movie. I think his final scene with Ultron is a great scene, and I like how he's, considers, and he's like calm. He gives just a different energy that I think is important to this movie, but I hate his creation scene. I just hate it. Until the moment he hands the hammer to Thor, and then I'm like, oh no, I'm on board here.
Yeah, because even like that scene, it feels just slapped in there, and to the degrees it is. But the one before that established that this is going to be a thing, just all of a sudden Ultron's building a body, and he needs this, this thing from Dr. Cho and all that. It's like, that wasn't really established as like a desire of his. Now,
why does Ultron need a body? Yeah, I mean, like, Ultron's entire motivations, and we'll be getting into this in a moment, are muddled as hell, but you can kind of get the idea of his grand plans. But why does Ultron need a body?
Yeah, and again, that's one of those things where, like, you watch the movie enough, you see that they're trying to establish it, and there's very creation. He's like, "Where's your body?" He doesn't understand, and then it's just like, and then yet they have Tony Stark saying, "Why is he building human bodies? Those aren't even very efficient." So, it establishes there's something there, but there's still not enough to really make us understand or believe it, especially again if you're not watching it as often as I have ended up seeing it, and frankly will see it again because I enjoy what I enjoy out of it. And yeah, just the Vision scene is like part of that, and why it exists is what this franchise has to do as part of franchise building, fan service, and frankly just marketing, is you need to introduce new characters with different movies, right? A big part of marketing is simply like casting news, right? A new person has been added. Who will be in the new Avengers movie? Like,
who will they be playing if they're rolling?
A month and a half out, we can like, oh, now there's a news feature on Elizabeth Olsen, the newest edition, and they'll keep talking. And like, they don't have as many. So if you're going to have Vision, who is somebody who has been established member of the Avengers for years now, you have to do it now. You can't wait. It has to be done when Ultron is around. but it's like you had a whole movie without it, and suddenly it's so important. And it's just like, it just shows much like the way that they have to shove in the Infinity Stone stuff and some of the other things is they had not yet mastered how we keep serving the franchise goals in ways that feel at least a little organic or at least less stuffed.
Yeah. And here's a question for you. In the comics, Ultron creates Vision, right?
Correct.
So would it have been better if Ultron's sidekick for most of the movie was Vision and not Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver? Because then you'd have Vision created early on too, and then he would be turning on his master rather than like never really affiliated with him besides just the body that he created.
Possibly. Just then you'd also get into the issue of like we need to get both into Ultron's head, which again this movie struggles with in the first place, and Vision's head. Whereas at least here it's like, well, it's Jarvis, the guy who's been fighting him. So it's like I think it would have felt less rushed in that there would have been this character of Vision established, but establishing who Vision is and why he turns on his master might have been an even greater challenge. Although I guess they didn't work too hard about why Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. They made their turn pretty quickly, although at least it was quickly enough that like once they found out he was planning on killing everybody, the decision was fairly easy. Whereas you would have to assume that there's not something that wouldn't have been news to Vision. I mean, it certainly could have been a better way because it's hard to suggest that the way they did it would be difficult to beat.
Yeah. But let's talk a little bit more about Ultron, because I think when you ask people about this movie, I think the most common criticism in this movie is just what the hell was going on with Ultron? What was he planning? What were his motivations? And I think you can kind of see them thinly sketched in, or at least some of them. And we talked a little about this. It's, he's created to protect the world, only he sees the world's biggest threat as basically being the Avengers. So he sets out to destroy the Avengers. It's your classic robot sees mankind as the greatest threat to mankind. It's your Skynet, it is a common trope. But does Ultron work?
No, not in like a villain whose motivations are understandable. And obviously now I've seen it enough times. It's like, okay, I see what they were trying to do.
Yes.
But I also see that they didn't quite get there. Interesting, like even just with you saying it now for the first time ever, almost Ultron would have made more sense after Civil War. Like as a response to the Sokovia Accords, as a response to the fact that there aren't Avengers now, so that's why he builds them. And it's already out there that these Avengers and the cost of these superheroes is so great. But of course they happen because of Ultron in this degree, although they could have pushed it one way or the other. But I still think he's a good villain. I think his motivations aren't strong enough. But like the character himself within this movie, I don't like him. I like him as an antagonist. I like James Spader's performance of him. I like a lot of his dialogue. I like, his power set. So it's like, I think he's a fine villain for this movie. It's just like, why does he suddenly decide to destroy the world? Man, because bad guy.
I mean, his motivations are a complete mess. And I think one of the biggest problems with this movie and him is the fact that when you have James Spader has a certain voice that people associate with James Spader, and they overlay characteristics on that voice because we're very familiar with James Spader. James Spader has been acting for a very long time now. He has an established persona. He he habits characters. You kind of know what you're getting when you get James Spader. And they really allow that to kind of carry Ultron's characterization. Even leaving beyond his motivations, that's a separate question from just what he is, who he is as a character. But they don't give us who he is as a character beyond just he's voiced by James Spader. Now, here's the thing. James Spader does a great job voicing Ultron. He delivers laugh lines that are really good. The way he delivers lines are really good. I like his vocal performance. I don't like the character, and the motivations are muddy. And even with the motivation that I stated earlier, I still don't think that fully establishes why he then needs like the perfect body. Only like you said, it's kind of hinted that he wants a body because, like that's, I guess, like he felt that he was lacking this. And I think that's kind of one of the things is I think Whedon was going for was a irrational robot. We always think of robots as being too rational. I think he was going for the crazy robot here. Only it's hard to write crazy, and it's even harder to write crazy robot because robots, especially as we construct them, are, again, too rational. So, and I think that characterization just doesn't work.
Yeah, like you see it in his opening creation, where it's just the blue data ball versus the orange data ball. Is like that
Right.
He just quickly gets overwhelmed by all the information and just trying to figure everything out, and something breaks there. And it's just like, like the pieces are there if they had more time to develop it. Again, if he had been working on Ultron at a certain point and then to be continued even. Now, if they had done that in say in Iron Man 3, one of our chief complaints about Iron Man 3 is they clearly just threw this in to set up for another movie. So it's tough. And the way you said it shows that, while these movies and this franchise has been, really great, we obviously love it. And that especially, for blockbuster entertainment, it's still limited. This is still not the ideal medium for these stories, for continuous storytelling. Movies have never quite been that, and Marvel has been doing a lot of work, in some cases struggling at times and succeeding at others in making it into that medium. So yeah, I think, but I like Ultron in the movie. So I don't think he's a failure in the way that some of the other villains we've talked about. But, why he ends up doing everything he does, it's muddled as heck. And frankly, another lesson I think they learned is that, Thanos' purpose is very clear to him. Whether it's a good purpose or not, it's his, and they established that very easily.
I agree with that about Thanos. You can disagree with whether or not this is a smart or silly purpose or a good purpose, but it's very clear, and that's what he cares about. With Ultron, again, it's muddled, and it's a shame because, again, I like Spader's vocal performance. I like the fights against Ultron, not even the ones we've talked about, but even the chase fight where they kidnap the body. That's a great sequence, so it's a shame that they just can't really nail his characterization, his motivation, because there are parts of him that I like. But overall, I just don't think the villain net works at all here, and that's a shame.
All right. When we come back, I think I'm going to try and stop pretending that I know that I don't know what's going to happen in trivia. Let's watch what happens.
This is exactly what I wanted. All of you against all of me. How can you possibly hope to stop me?
Like the old man said. Together.
All right, and we're back with a brand new set of 5 questions because, as we said, we're redoing this. We already had 5 questions asked, and we thought about being really impressive and just knowing the answer. Although the one the Lost recording had a bit of a controversial ending, so hopefully this set it right.
Yep. Well, let's see what happens. I'm ready to do it.
Last footage.
I probably won. I was nice enough to call it a push, but then I was thinking I still should have been my win, because really I had more going in. You needed to tie, but whatever. I will just win this week, and that's how it'll go.
But the rules on the Lost recording were that the last question was worth 2 points. So
we were switching it. All right, Alex, who are you asking first?
You and my brother created this question.
All right.
Ooh.
So it's pretty easy.
It just should be good because your brother's never seen the full movie Age of Ultron, but that's all right. You don't need to see it all for trivia. What you got?
What does Black Widow say to Hulk to calm him down?
Oh, I actually, this is an interesting little nod because I said this to your brother when he was dressed as Hulk in one of our end credit sequences. And if you guys don't know, we do post credit sequences. Some of you might just turn it off and you're missing out. Like the people who walk out of it. Am I stalling here? Maybe. It says...
because I'm getting ready to steal. Steal.
It's sun's getting real low.
Yeah, that's why it's so easy.
Hey, big guy. Sun's getting low. And then, of course, it's great when it comes back in Ragnarok. All right, ask the loser a question.
Oh.
Teaching him, a fine sportsmanship at a young age.
This is one that you might not remember. It's like
okay.
We only said it once, so Where was Black Widow trained to be an assassin?
Where was Black Widow trained to be an assassin? Are we looking for like a very specific place beyond just Russia? Or are we looking for
Yeah, like are you talking about a city, a country, or a spot?
A spot.
Okay. Give me a sec. She
A sec? Like, or are you looking it up on Google?
No, of course not. Why would I be doing that?
The training center.
Yes, I don't remember where that is.
You're sad. It's the Red Room.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a book that somehow that slipped in it, and I still have a Daredevil. And it was in. They also had a Daredevil thing, and it talked about all the details of Black Widow and Daredevil. That's how I know them, even though I don't even know a clue.
Yes, it was a kid's book that talks about the Red Room. Hopefully, they don't talk about everything that happens.
I was going to say that's okay.
Turner brother. All right, let me finish them off right now. Oh, phrasing. What? Anyway.
What does What does Thor see in his hallucination?
A vision? Hey, yeah, he sees the Infinity Stones.
No, that's not the hallucination. What Thor sees in his hallucination is the dead Hall of Heroes in Valhalla, and he sees Heimdall talking to him. That's what he sees in the hallucination.
And that's why he goes hunting for
the and the dream is when he sees the Infinity Stones. Ooh, way to take one back on a technicality.
That's why I'm a lawyer.
And it was also kind of Ragnarok, since
well, that's the thing. It's an interesting, like we've already talked about it on the podcast, but like one of the worst scenes in the movie. But or actually, I guess mine is that there. But it's like, yeah, he is the destroyer. Spoiler alert. All right. Well, then I guess you asked Matt now.
Yep. I got a chance to tie it up.
No, but yeah. Oh, who is the only Avenger that Scarlet Witch did not affect with the hallucination?
Hawkeye.
You're right.
Yeah, because he's done the whole mind control thing.
Yeah, he's done the whole mind. Oh, are we tied? We're tied.
I don't think we are. Yes, it's 2-2. Unnaturally, but yes, this is. I mean, I could go on a technicality. It's like she never mind controlled Vision or Quicksilver, but I know.
Well, because they were not Avengers at that time. By the end of the movie, not the time she mind controlled people. Let's do it. Let's get this last question.
It's Hawkeye. All right, this is it. For all the marbles. For all the Infinity Stones.
20 points.
Sure.
Just so they feel good.
Yep.
How many kids does Hawkeye have?
2. Just like me. Unless,
unless you're counting the baby, in which case it's 3.
Yeah, you're right,
we don't know when she gives birth.
I think there's probably Supreme Court cases about this right now.
No, I mean, that pregnant, she's 8 months. I think actually Supreme Court cases probably say that baby is alive.
Maybe in your country. 2. I mean, I guess by the end of the movie, he has 3 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, we still managed to have a controversy.
What?
Where you land on who wins this trivia week could depend on where you land on much hotter political topics.
Okay, can we just say Matt won? Since that's what I have written down on my sheet.
What, do you have Matt 1 down on your sheet? You have 3. Gotcha.
3.
All right. I'll allow it, but there's some things to be discussed about when a person becomes a person.
Don't worry about it.
It's whatever the trivia master says, right?
That's right. All right, trivia master.
He has 22 points.
I have a question for you.
What?
Which Quicksilver do you like better? Do you like the MCU version or the one that shows up in X-Men at like the same year?
MCU.
And why is that? I know you're sitting there thinking I already answered this question, but like that, nobody has proof of that.
I know.
This is why we're pretending. Let go of your paper so we'll stop sweating.
Okay, bye. Just because he's more serious, and usually in the comic books, Quicksilver won't let it all, he will be very stiff and barely even talk.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of a more stoic person in the comic books, and actually, in a Peter David comic, they actually get into why he is a bit of a jerk. We'll say
A cow person.
How about you, Matt? Which one did you prefer?
I prefer the X-Men one, mainly because the scenes where they're showing his powers are the standout scenes of those movies, and I think they're really good scenes. So,
You?
Yeah, and I'm somewhere in between because I agree, and actually, I mean, so do you. The Quicksilver scenes of the last two X-Men movies were the best scenes of the movies.
Yeah.
You actually make sure to pull your brother in the room to watch them. But I don't like the character himself. I mean, he was pretty much just invented so that they could have him, and then they've built good scenes around him. But the character itself is kind of annoying, whereas the one in the MCU isn't around long enough to be annoying. We'll say. So, yeah.
I think it's a fair. Yeah, I think you might call him annoying too, but he's also not around that long. So,
And there's been leaks in Infinity War that's kind of probably being a trick, and that Quicksilver's coming back.
That would be great because you don't have his bobblehead. So
I want it.
Well, maybe you'll get a chance.
I don't even think they made one.
No, I only saw a custom. Otherwise, no one there's there. All right, I think that's good.
They did make a Quicksilver one.
So I guess next week, which is really just in a few days, I need to take back my title while the controversy lives on. Congratulations, Matt.
You're still winning.
Well,
Yeah.
overall, it's true. In fact, we're getting close to the point where he won't be able to catch me, but it's still there. This could be, a huge comeback.
That's right.
All right, good night, Alexander.
Thor report on the Hulk?
The gates of hell are filled with the screams of his victims. But not the screams of the dead, of course. No. Wounded screams, mainly whimpering, great deal of complaining, and tales of sprained deltoids and gout.
R-rated movie. We've talked a little bit about similar things. We've talked about darkness in superhero movies. We've talked about how we enjoy the fact that Marvel has a lighter touch. But should they have a lighter touch? Should they experiment with an R-rated movie? What do you think, Andy?
There's a caveat to this, but in general, no. These superhero movies don't need to be darker. They certainly don't need to be exclusionary to children. And this is something that people need to learn. And I think most people kind of do if you look at the box office of these films. But these movies and a lot of properties like them were made for children, and you need to accept that in your life, and you need to accept that the things that you enjoyed as children that are once again being served to you in a way that is palatable as an adult doesn't mean that you get to keep them for children. Right. This means that your Star Wars films are going to have fluffy, fun creatures in it. It means that Harry Potter is going to still be about, boy wizards at boarding schools. And it means that superhero movies are going to be for children.
Well, I mean, and the one pushback I'd give is more for all ages. The appeal should be something broader. It helps tell the story they're going for. It's great because it tells a story that needs to be told in that fashion. And the story was one that was a good story.
Yeah, and like Wolverine and there are other characters like that. It's basically, if you give your character stabby powers, it can be tough to get their action sequences under the rating, even in a relaxed atmosphere that will allow for much more violence than other things. And Deadpool obviously is another one. That's where the caveat comes, is that Marvel is very close to finishing their acquisition of Fox Studios. Or sorry, not Marvel. Disney is Fox Studios, which will mean that Marvel will have the opportunity to make, both Fantastic Four and X-Men movies, of which Deadpool falls under that banner.
Yep.
Yeah, they should keep making Deadpool movies the way they're making Deadpool movies.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they should keep them the heck out of the MCU. Because, and kind of getting back, yes, you're right that these are all ages, and I agree, these aren't like children's films per se. I think everybody needs to know their own children, to what degree and what age they will expose them to them. I have two, and only one of them watches them so far, although a lot of that is because the other one doesn't like to sit still for things like this. But superheroes are for children. That's who they were created for. That's the genesis of these creatures. Of these characters, and some of them are creatures.
Some of them are creatures.
Yeah, and that's what's great about them. And when you are forced to make your films because you're embarrassed, you want these to be darker because this is not just for kids anymore, this is serious stuff, then what you just keep doing is unraveling the threads to the point where like they are no longer the thing they are, or they somehow become more ridiculous as a result, because then you have like Robin saying F Batman and crushing skulls, but he's still wearing like a red and yellow and green costume. And it's just like the question is like, well, then why? Why is this guy beating up clowns and dressing like a bat if everything is so serious, not for children?
Yeah.
And the answer is you can't. If you leave all that stuff behind, all you're doing is admitting, yeah, this all stuff is ridiculous, but we'll try to make it less ridiculous. Whereas when you make it a little more friendly for families, you're just like, yeah, this is the world we're in. Nobody thinks it's ridiculous when, they sing and talk to woodland creatures in animated movies, because we recognize that this material on some level isn't directed solely at adults. And that's the thing, like, stop being embarrassed at superheroes for being superheroes. Enjoy that superheroes are superheroes.
Yeah, no, I think those are very good points. One thing that what I will add is there's a push in some circles that, movies, especially comic book movies, should be darker, and this word's thrown around a lot, darker, but I think it sometimes gets conflated with another word, which is grounded. I think there have been successful grounded comic book movies. I think Dark Knight, and that Nolan trilogy is more grounded. Darker is like the current DC movies, excluding Wonder Woman. Like, darker, what they want to see is the comic book tropes subverted. And I think that comes from a period where there was a time when comic books got darker in like the late 80s and early 90s, and the people who grew up with that stuff are now adults, and they're very vocal, and they're probably the most vocal people online, and so they want to see the stuff that they grew up with. Only a lot of those stories from that time period stunk. And, Marvel was like going out of business during that time period. So why do you want those stories?
Yeah, and a lot of this is like, in trying to make these, stories for children about, people wearing capes and their fantastical powers that helps them save the day, trying to make them more serious. And what you're really doing is making them a little bit childish. It's just a different kind of child. And what that child is the adolescent. When you're an adolescent, and frankly, Deadpool is an incredibly adolescent movie, just one that, literal adolescents can't watch. But when you're watching it, you're just being taken back to when, you were 13, 14, 15, and this is your idea of what cool is. And I say that as somebody who enjoys those movies, but it's very much about like a teenage boy's conception of, violence and sexuality and humor. It's not like there's a lick of smart humor in there. They are, teenage adolescent fantasies. And frankly, a lot of us, and myself included, recognize that like what we liked and thought as adolescents is a lot sillier than that which we liked as children. Back then, and frankly, I still love like teen type stuff, the things that are actually aimed at teens as opposed to teens a perception of what an adult is. Because teen stuff can be fun because they feel everything but know nothing. Whereas that's what you get for like these darker, more realistic movies. Is just somebody who doesn't quite understand adulthood. So this is what it's going to be. It's going to be more punching. It's going to be more serious. It's going to be more sexual.
Yeah, I think there's something. Yeah, and I think another way to kind of talk about what you were saying there, this teen, the teen view of maturity, this teen view of adulthood, is there is a misconception when you are younger about, I think, how hard it is to be good. I think when you're younger, in some ways you see good as a default, and so you think it's easy. But what I think is interesting is that being good, doing good in the world is actually very difficult, because when you get to be an adult, you're pulled in all these different directions by just minor stuff. And the road good or doing good in the world, it's actually just kind of like letting things happen and just living your life. And I think one of the appealing things about heroes is they make these choices that don't seem like they're hard because they're in a comic book world and we expect heroes to be heroes. But making the choice to be a hero, making these choices day in, day out, those are hard choices. And those are mature choices. And they're more mature than the idea to shoot the Joker in the head or something like that. That's not a mature choice. The mature choice is to live in society and yet try to make it better. That is so much harder than anything that these, that people like craving this darker, like more violent angle acknowledge. Being violent is not hard for these people. Being violent is the easy choice. It's like the constant war with Bruce Banner and Hulk. Being the Hulk would be easy. All Bruce has to do is just let his self-control go. But the harder choice for him is to not be the Hulk or to control the Hulk.
Yeah, and what shows that, like, in these tales, these, childish tales of, superheroes and villains, there's actually a level of sophistication to it. That's why they've persevered over the years. Sophistication is that what the people who are, to some degree, embarrassed by it, fail to see. That's what they don't recognize. And like, just personally as a fan, and I'm not saying that just now as like a dad fan who selfishly obviously wants these movies because I've shared them with my children. I have all of this and all of the money that goes along with it, which is of course the biggest reason why they're not going to do R-rated movies, nor should they. But just when I was growing up, I grew up a fan of superhero comics, and I constantly encountered self-hating fans who always wanted to transform them into something more to justify their interest in them. And this isn't just a thing that conflicts superhero fans. You see this in the ongoing battle, and it was true, then as well, of like Star Wars. And it's just like, they'd be like, oh, I don't read comics, I read graphic
novels.
That's just a way of trying to bring legitimacy to something that doesn't need it. You don't need to gain the respect of people who don't get it, because what you're doing is not, something to be ashamed of. It's not something that would deny you respect. All a graphic novel is a publishing format of comics,
Right.
So, and also it's like, are we missing action films that are like violent? And I guess because nobody wants to go R, maybe that's where this thirstiest. But like, I've seen John Wick kill people left and right and loved it.
John Wick's great. I love John Wick.
The first Taken movie was fantastic. So it's like, why do we need our colorful superheroes to be that? And maybe one answer is that because Marvel, especially, and superheroes in general have taken over, that people are just like, well, I need this, so I want that. But it's like, no, you're missing one of the core strengths and competencies of these characters if you choose to try to make them not for children. And again, caveat, there are some characters that make sense too. It is tough to do a full-on Wolverine fight without a bunch of blood and stuff, because he has 6 knives on his hands and that cuts through people.
And it's also just like very much true to the character, where like blood defines Wolverine, and his guilt and his savagery. You need blood for Wolverine. And just beyond like the fact that there are some characters that would fit the R-rated movie, I expect Marvel to go smaller after the next Avengers movie. So if they come up with a story that should be told or needs to be told in an R-rated fashion, they should do that. They shouldn't censor themselves for a story that has to be told that way. And there might be a story like that with a character that they haven't introduced yet, but I don't think they should make one just to make one.
Yeah, and frankly, it's hard for me to imagine, because you get into the problem of like, you allow a Punisher. It's tough to do a Punisher in any other way. But Punisher, the problem with Punisher as a character has always been like, why are the superheroes letting him be?
Yeah.
And sometimes they even try to put him in crossovers with other characters, and at the end, Daredevil or Captain America will be like, well, at least you're stopping bad guys, even though you're a murderer. So it's just like even just within there, where this seedier R-rated hero is operating. I don't know why the other heroes should allow that to happen.
Yeah.
So if they were going to do it in this other direction, it would have to be almost like in a non-MCU version, which is like I'm saying, keep doing Deadpool movies, just don't bring him into this universe. Sure, he will certainly comment on the universe. He's doing that already. But you don't need to incorporate that into this greater world, just like I don't think they need to incorporate R-rated themes, which, isn't just darker, right? That's, a certain, threshold of language and nudity and violence. It's like, no, man, let superhero stories be superhero stories. And if you got other ones that you need to tell, they don't need to be superhero stories.
It's funny that you mentioned the Punisher. I'm now regretful that I don't have on hand my Archie Meets the Punisher comic, because that would be a good capper to this. But also Marvel has Netflix if they want to tell those stories. And I think they have told kind of more violent stuff on Netflix to, mixed success.
And frankly, that's a good example, both Netflix and the Punisher in general. Punisher had 2 movies, nobody cared. Punisher had a Netflix series that you haven't even watched, and I gave up after 1 episode. So maybe the final answer, should Marvel do R-rated movies? The answer should be no, because they like making money. And before Deadpool and Logan, it seemed to be not a great way of doing so.
Wait a second. No one else is going to deal with the fact that Cap just said language?
I know. Just slipped out.
And next week, we will be covering, we'll be back to 2 movies. We are covering the end of Phase 2 with Ant-Man and the beginning of Phase 3 with Captain America Civil War.
So
anything else, Matt?
Next week? No. Let's tune in and let's roll credits.
Rudy, end the podcast, Rudy, end the podcast, end the podcast, Rudy. You can do it, Rudy, end the podcast, end the podcast. All right, I'll do it myself.